Everything good?
All right, I'll give it a couple more seconds and then we'll get started. All right, Holly, I think we're good to go. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another session of Fundraising Fridays. My name is Kafili Thomas. I am the Director of Program Learning here at Progressive Multiplier. And this week, we are going to go over knowing your donor base. And I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Polly Stepanopoulos.
Close enough.
I'm going to get it, Paul. I'm sorry.
Stamatopoulos. Hi, y'all.
And this is the entire Progressive Multiplier team. And we will actually be adding a new face to this for the Associate Director of Movement Group Engagement, who will be joining us in just a couple weeks. So very excited. You'll see normally Polly or myself on these calls, but other PM members may join depending on the topic and to provide expertise. So tons of familiar faces. Make sure you say hi and give us a chat. And then a little bit about Progressive Multiplier. So we are a funding intermediary, and our purpose is to help orgs build a progressive movement of, by, and for everyday people. We do this through organizing and leveraging funding to create on-ramps for progressive organizations to start, strengthen, or scale individual giving and earned revenue programs. And through an online community of practice and our grant making and support program, we build the progressive sector's revenue generation knowledge and skills so that they can amplify a people-powered movement. We have three main buckets of work in which we provide grants to: achieving justice, realizing democracy, and restoring the environment. And these are our focus areas, and we believe these are critical paths to building sustained progressive power in the United States. Wanted to give a shout out to our amazing partners at Resilience Initiative, who have helped sponsor this training. Please introduce yourself in the chat. If you haven't already, name, organization, and role. Hopefully this training is super useful to you. You want to share it with the rest of your team, and you'll be able to do so through our private YouTube channel. I am putting the link in the chat right now, and we'll let you know once it is uploaded and good to go. So a little bit about what is additionally available through this partnership. So we have the Fundraising Fridays, of which you're a part of. There are 2 tracks, building base building on like fundraising fundamentals, and then also looking at trends and next level topics that are emerging. And this is really driven by you all. So if there are topics that you want to see, think that you would love to talk about, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Michelle Mengel at Resilience Initiative if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. In addition to these trainings, we're also providing one-on-one fundraising coaching. So you're available to get individual coaching, consulting, or deliverable preparation. Things that we've worked on in this format in the past include like board fundraising trainings, annual development plans, end of year campaigns, major gift programs. So if you need any support or structure, or even just some thought partnership around those, I really highly suggest signing up for the one-on-ones. I'm going to put the link in the chat now. So please feel free to sign up so we can support you even beyond just the trainings that we're having. And as I said before, we have a private YouTube channel that has access to not only this session, but all past Fundraising Friday sessions. So, feel free to check us out at that link that we've shared, whether it's a topic we've covered in the past or something that's new and emerging. We have a lot of information and resources for you all. So please feel free to check those out. Okay. So on the topic of knowing your donor base, these are the topics that we're going to cover today. Who's who, steady as a rock, garbage in, garbage out, segmented success, and a roadmap to segmentation. So let's start with who's who. Who actually are your donors and why does that matter? So starting with just the stories that can be gleaned from just the raw data of numbers and a donor base. Dollars in isn't the only important information to know about your donors. Oftentimes in fundraising, we really just focus on just the pure numbers of how much was raised, who gave us the most money, and that's what we focus on. But understanding who donates to your work is critical to your success, and who being not just an individual or a small subset of people, but as far as it relates to the community that you serve, who is actually relating to your work, believing in your work, and supporting your work. So just wanted to open up the floor and see, beyond dollars in, what are some other characteristics that may be important for you currently to learn about your donor base and who is a part of it. Age is a great one. Thank you, Catherine. Issue area, I'm seeing interest, demographics, their relationship and experience with the organization, connections, interest again, where they live. Yeah, this is all great stuff. These are all definitely incredibly important. But we're going to dive a little bit deeper too today and talk about some other characteristics that we may not normally think about. Past knowledge of mission, yeah, for sure. So knowing your donors gives you an advantage in both fundraising and programming, because this is the most direct way that folks from the community can engage with your organization. So you can really gain some insights from where your story is resonating and who really believes in your work. So let's talk about how some donor information can influence fundraising and programming. Seeing interest, inclination, and capacity, for sure.
I'd love to hear from some of the folks who are throwing some some stuff in the chat about how do you see the connection between the stuff that you posted, that you listed in the chat, and the connecting to the mission. I see direct connections, but I'd like to hear from you.
Can you repeat the last part? I'm sorry.
So I'd like to hear from you, I saw that you posted, for example, interest and capacity. How does knowing somebody's interest and capacity affect your fundraising and programming?
Yes, ma'am, I understand. Because the reason why I put that is, if they're not interested in something, they're not going to invest in it. And so to understand who they are and what they like, and compare to maybe a project or a program that you have, will get them to donate that. Because I noticed when I did a fundraiser, I have a task force, and I did a fundraiser to help police departments, because we're in super rural Alabama, and we don't have as many people don't have access to get to existing services. So that's why our organization exists. So I wanted to give the police department something that they can have, so when they don't have to call me in the middle of the night, they already have it. So I had more people to give to that than actual my organization, which is doing something similar. I know it sounds crazy, but they didn't. So we were able to raise about $4,000 to give to different police departments so they can be able to have direct services to victims. So I think so that's why I put interest, because that worked for that particular fundraiser. And then also I also noticed, I just want to throw in, we had like a any victim that we have throughout the year, we would give them help aid them in getting their kids, if they have kids, something for Christmas if they believe. And so one of the things that a lady, she said, I wasn't gonna give to the police department because of her personal experience, but she said, but I donate to a family. So I think that was important as well, to understand that all your public doesn't, you have to know your people. Just want to say that.
Mhm. So Pamela, also you put interest, and you also noted capacity. I'd love to hear if you want to jump, connect over to what Portia was saying. What are your thoughts there? Or if anybody else wants to jump in.
We also have a comment in the chat, Polly. Knowing capacity to give allows us to know what kind of asks to make: a direct donation, bequeath, volunteer, sign a petition, how likely they are to respond to these asks with a positive. It helps us prioritize and be efficient with time, for sure. So the more you know about your donor base, the more educated an ask you can make, and the more likely it is that that ask will be reciprocated with a yes. So you're able to really cut down on the time and kind of the built-in waste of asks that aren't going to get anywhere. That way you aren't underselling or overselling across. Oh, sorry, Pamela. Go ahead.
Abika, you want to talk about your comment?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So Urge, a couple years ago, we came up with our young people's policy agenda, and there were 6 issue areas that were identified by our base. And abortion justice or real abortion access was one of them. But our programming leans heavily on that just because it's top of mind. There's a lot of stuff happening in the policy sphere with that. However, our base also does programming around like comprehensive sex ed, and our campus chapters, do a lot of different campaigns on other issues as well. So if I know what our donors' issue area interest is, then I can cater and tailor our communications to that. Because if they look at our website or even our social media, they'll think all we do is abortion. That's not all we do. So I know that when coordinating with the program team, I can ask them like, hey, tell me some highlights and good stuff you're doing for comprehensive sex ed. And then I can make sure that I include that when communicating with that subset of donors. So for me, I think that's really important. And then another piece that I'm still typing, but I'll just say out now is we are a young people organization. So we are looking at our base is 18 to 30-year-olds. But our demographic, our donor database, and we don't fully have this information, but it leans heavily towards older donors. And so I want to be able to like tailor the message, like be the elders that the young people need to be the reproductive justice leaders of tomorrow. So I think knowing that demographic information, specifically age, specifically like where they are in their life, will help. Like I would message something different if I was sending an email to someone under the age of 30 versus over the age of 30. So that's kind of how it's important.
Right, those are great points. Segmented communication is totally key to building a rapport with different parts of your organization and your base at large, right? And so you want to communicate with different folks differently and meet them where they're at. And so some messaging and some topics will be catered towards others more strongly than it would be to different folks. Similar to like if you were writing, you know, a proposal and you're a multifaceted organization, a foundation might be interested in one side of your work more than another based on like their funding interests. Individuals are the same way. So figuring out like what is the key point of why folks are interested in supporting your organization and really being able to build on that is really a strong angle to pursue. Great. So let's talk about who actually gives to you. Knowing your donor base gives you an insight to your community. You know, your donors are the most direct supporters of your org, your mission and your effectiveness, right? By giving you, even if it's just $1, a person is making the conscious choice that what you do in the world is something that they want to see, and they want to be a part of that to make it more effective and build more. And oftentimes we see, I think it was just referenced by like a kind of difference in our donor base per se, and like the community that we serve, like our constituency, right? So I wanted to just open up how, if that's common for your organization. Does your donor base actually represent the community your organization intends to serve? Oftentimes, because, you know, we're doing work within marginalized communities, there is a natural apprehension for asking from a community that we're serving, but like, you know, everyone has the ability to give, either, even if it's not financially, with their time, with their effort, being an advocate for your organization in different ways, right? So if you open up the breadth of what it means to be a donor, like how do you interact with the actual communities that you serve? And is your donor base representative of those communities? You know, and the only way to know that is through donor analysis. We'll be able to figure out where our message is strong and where it is weak. I think we're up one more, Paul. Yeah. So if you don't know who exactly is giving to your organization, you really don't know who is endorsing or disapproving of your work as an organization. Yeah, Jennifer, I see your question here. How do folks typically find out a donor's age? And Polly answered, yeah, there's surveys, some people pay to amend some information. We actually have a section later on, Jennifer, that we're going to talk about different ways of like getting certain types of information and like what are other forms of information that you may want. So we'll dive into this, but definitely want to open up the floor a bit more if other people have suggestions. I see Nancy says that ours doesn't. We are serving a very low income Mexican heritage community, and the majority of our donors are white, not exclusively. We incorporate volunteers from a variety of backgrounds, but the farm working population is struggling just to survive. Totally understand that. Yeah, and so that's a very common structural difference that exists within our industry and the way that our work is set up, because of the focus around capital and the need to like try and get as much money in as possible. Sometimes it skews the demographic makeup of the donor base away from like what the constituency base of the organization and what you're trying to serve is. But we also know that like money brings influence, both explicitly and implicitly, right? And so if we really want to be connected to community voice, I believe it's truly important for us to think of creative and engaging ways of incorporating constituency voice within not only your programming as a focus and maybe your leadership as an organization, but also within your donor base, because those dollars are votes of support. Yeah, I see we had some more notes or some more points on the gathering of information. These are all good strategies. There's a hesitancy to ask our chapter members to vote. However, we are toying with how to be a resource organizer training. Philanthropy is a form of activism too, for sure. And I think that there is, especially for movement-based groups, like a very convoluted relationship with money and capital, right? We know that we understand that we need money and we need resourcing to do the work, but actively seeking that out is incredibly hard for us to do organizationally. But then if you ask the wrong people for money, you get in trouble for that too, right? So it's like we can't ask our constituency group for money, but then we can't like quote unquote sell out at the same time because it's bad money that we're taking, right? So like, where's the money supposed to come from? So that's why on both sides, like internally, it's important to have like really good frameworks about like what money you want to accept and what your foundational philosophy around fundraising is, but also doing that funder education amongst your organizers, amongst your staff, even if you're not a movement-based organization, among I know there's some, I think I saw some folks from like museums in here, among your participants and visitors, like of what resourcing and supporting an organization like yours means. So
Yeah, that's one of the things that comes up quite a bit, actually, the whole tension that we see, especially with like organizations that do organizing and civic engagement, especially with like affected populations, like various groups. Like there's a desire to like create two separate groups. Like these are the folks we serve or that we're fighting for, and these are the groups that we solicit money from. And, I just always try to go back to the mantra of like organized people and organized money is how we create real and lasting change in a democracy. If we're separating those two categories and we're not doing effective organizing, you got to do both in both places. I want the donors of means to have as much investment in the organizing work as I want my activists to have as much investment as our fundraising work, because that's how we're going to be more powerful. The opposition, no matter what your position is, typically has that area covered. So we need to make sure that we bring to the table all the resources that we need to, and just always remember it's our job to ask and their job to decide. And if we are making decisions for people, then we're taking away their agency.
100%. Yeah, Pamela made a note here, which I just want to touch on really quickly about, money from certain sources and their implication with like systems of oppression against groups that you are serving. And that's always difficult. It's a huge tension, whether it's from individual donors or even foundations. A lot of this accumulated wealth, tracing back the history of it, through the systems that were set up, sometimes it doesn't come from the best places. So yeah, it's definitely important to have some internal frameworks about who you accept money from, why you accept it, and under what conditions. That's a great point, Pamela. So let's move on to Steady as a Rock. How knowing your base provides a strong foundation for your organization. Right. So your individual donors really give you insight to how your community views your work. As I said before, you know, similar to all other organizations, people vote with their dollars, right? And we have to respect donors' ability and agency to do so, right? I think oftentimes, I think the point was brought up, the point was brought up before about like not wanting to solicit from certain demographic groups, especially the ones that you serve, because they may be marginalized, maybe lower income, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, giving folks that choice to be able to be part of the organization and to have like true buy-in is something that and as a field we don't do enough. And you know, some of that additional marginalization of folks you know, feeds into also like the white supremacist capitalist structures that like, you know, only certain people have wealth or have the ability to give, or certain jobs and certain roles, even in organizations that are meant to help their own communities, like certain roles are only reserved for certain people, right? And so we want to break down some of those barriers. Yeah, like Polly said, it's our job to ask, and it's their job to decide, right? They can always say no, or they don't have it, or et cetera, et cetera. And then that also opens the door for like really interesting conversations internally about like, okay, so whether it's, you know, a donor, a board member, whatever, changing those definitions of like what access and entry into your organization looks like. Because if folks don't have the propensity to give, but are really interested in the work, what can you do as an organization to break down those barriers, to invite them in and to have them have impact in your organization outside of just a dollar? So yeah, wanted to ask, how do we ensure that we're capturing the attention of those that we want aligned with our movement? I know that someone mentioned that they were a youth group before, you know, like, so how do you engage, for instance, young people? I know there was a group earlier that was working with, I think, farm working population. And I think they said they do volunteerism, which is a great tool to do that.
Yeah, agree, Pamela. Sometimes guilt does motivate people to give, but we definitely want to make sure that we're keeping on the right side of that line of, you know, not extractive, not manipulative, but, you know, still selling the work that we're doing in a way that is convincing and emotive and gets folks connected.
Yeah, if folks don't have any ideas for this, oh, here we go. We coordinate with grassroots orgs and get young folks involved through demonstrations, sign up petitions, but we don't have in-person volunteering opportunities. That's still a really strong way to bring folks into your pipeline and spread the word about your organization. We have a question. How do you get donors motivated when you continue to have leadership changes? We've had 3 EDs in the last 4 years and currently have an interim. That's definitely a great question. I would say, and Polly, definitely feel free to jump in here.
Yeah.
You have to take agency and ownership over your organizational story, right? So maybe a lot of people give based on stability, like, you know, brand names, similar to like regular, you know, for-profit products, like everyone knows Coca-Cola and Pepsi. There are certain nonprofits and foundations that everyone knows, or if you're a part of a community that everyone knows, right? But you can also just tell the story of your work. Like, you know, despite maybe some organizational changes, there are some like really great programming things that you want to highlight and rebuild trust within the organization, that despite, you know, maybe the leadership transition, we've still been able to chug along and really develop our programming. I think that that's a great way to re-engage with folks as well, and rebuild some of that organizational trust and branding.
Oh, 100%. And I think, you know, what I always try to keep the mission, vision, values at the center. And one of the things that I used to always say, when as a development director, or when I was, you know, even like training, you know, like working with my team, like our jobs are like to love, you know, like when I connect with donors, I want them to love me and forget me. Meaning that like I want them to fall in love with what I'm telling them about the organization, connect them to the mission, but to leave that lasting feeling, emotional feeling to the organization, so that when I leave, they can forget me the very next day, but what they remember is what they cared about about the organization. So I try, you know, like as big as a personality as I can be sometimes, overwhelming even, like I do try to make sure that when I'm communicating, especially one-on-one with donors, that I let the passion and the zeal and for the organization that I have be the connective tissue that brings them in, but that what keeps them there is the organization, that I can disappear. And in the same way with your communications, if it's all about your ED, if it's all about like a, you know, like central being, you know, like this can happen a lot with organizations that might have a charismatic founder who is seen as that organization. That's actually can be dangerous. So like a really good way I think for executive directors to sort of think about their role is in that same way. Like, yeah, they're the mouthpiece for the organization. Yeah, they're you know, they're in a leadership role, but they always should be taking it back to the mission and vision. And if you're doing that communicating publicly for the organization, it should always connect right back to the mission, so that those executive transitions hurt less. Now, there is a reality that like lots of funders get nervous at executive transitions because it gives a sense of instability, but that's when you really have to lean in to your mission, vision, values, and that the strength of your organization is what you do.
So, so going forward, I'm going to introduce a concept right now of the ideal donor, and we're going to talk about the ideal donor a lot going forward. So just to set the stage, right? A lot of organizations, like in their mind, like if you ask them if you could have like the perfect individual donor, it would be like a rich person with a ton of money to give, very low stakes. You don't have to talk to them. They just write the check every December, you know what I mean? Easy money, right? But I really want to challenge everyone to like flip this idea on its head, right? And you know, I come from a background of fundraising, and that was pretty much my entire career. But it's always important to note that like being a fundraiser is our job, right? Our job is to make money for the organization, but our goal is actually the mission and vision of the organization, right? So thinking deeply, what builds us the power that we need to enact the change that we want to see in the world? The actual reason why we're all here. Is it a rich person with a lot of money to give who isn't really involved with your work? Or is it a person from the community that you're actually trying to serve? Or is it a ally, like a true ally to that community, right? Because that's what actually is going to build the power and the effort necessary beyond just like our actual general task of raising money, to grow, to scale the organization to the point that we're able to make the critical mass needed to enact the change that we want to see, right? So we should think deeply about, for our organization and for the work that we do, who is that actual ideal donor? How do we court them? How do we engage with them? How do we build our base with them? As someone said before, philanthropy is activism. Yeah, so how do we bring more activists on our side to be able to support our work in more ways than one, right? And for the folks where we're talking about the situation where direct donations, right, may be a little bit more difficult for our ideal donor, what is impact beyond dollars? Once you've analyzed your donor base, how can you develop a deeper understanding of your ability to mobilize and connect with your target demographic? So wanted to open the floor up and just hear from you all, like, what is your ideal donor organizationally, like right now? And then, you know, after hearing what I just said, does that align with what I'm saying? Or is there maybe a disconnect between how you were looking at your ideal donor before and maybe the person you truly wanted to court to move your organization's mission?
I can jump in. My name is Leica, and so our organization has gotten a lot of institutional support in the past year. And I got hired just this past December to focus more on individuals, to build more of that, like that, to like keep the momentum we built. So we have a really robust like recurring donor base, but like we want to like keep them, you know. So I think now that we have like the stability in terms of funding, our organization definitely is investing more into like individual donors who are giving like an average of $50, right? Or like people who give recurringly, whether it's monthly or annually or whatever it is. So yeah, I think just to say that like big like institutional money is like, yeah, it's important, and it like actually funds the work that like that we want to do, which is like individual donor work and like building relationships. So yeah, that's where we're at right now.
Thank you for that, Rika. Yeah, you can definitely look at it as an investment, you know, to scale and to grow in the areas that you really want to. And you know, a lot of organizations would kill to have a robust recurring donor base. That you're in a really ideal situation for this type of work, and to like really segment your population out and do more personalized touches, because you have developed a base of individuals who, you know, have demonstrated a really strong affinity by being a recurring donor. And so, yeah, you're spot on. That's exactly what you want to do. You want to nurture those relationships and also keep them on board as long as possible. I want to lift up some stuff in the chat that I'm seeing here about the ideal donor. Anne says a donor that has personal experience with our work. Okay. Totally get that. Susan said, ideal donor would want to engage with us and promote our mission. There are, however, those who simply want to write the check and not be involved. And that can be frustrating. Yeah, for sure. And then your follow-up point that there's always that uncertainty because you haven't built that relationship 100%. So that's why the more info you know on your donor base, the more educated you can be on like the reliability of them returning to you. You know, there are always going to be some folks who just cut a check for whatever reason. And, you know, that money is still useful, but it's definitely something that you want to work around and try and minimize and work as best as you can to build relationships with your donor. Pamela says, for one, that they understand the work is a long haul struggle. Sorry, comment jumped. They're not unmotivated, distracted, or distraught by the necessary setbacks that come with fighting a long-term struggle for social justice. 100%. For advocacy organizations, this is like super critical and very hard, right? You have to figure out ways of communicating your progress with your donors in the intermediary steps before the big win, right? Whether it's a form of legislation being passed, some form of cultural change, these things take years, maybe even decades, right? So you need to be able to convince your donors that like they're investing in the right place and the right people to make that change happen. So a lot of that comes down to messaging and tracking data on your actual work and your ability to scale and build that critical mass. Catherine's point, they don't know about who their ideal donor is. Someone who spent a lot of time living in a different culture and place and have this belief that we're all together, we're all connected. Someone is struggling in a difficult, oppressive context halfway around the world, it affects you, even though you might be thousands of miles away. For sure. You know, an emotive giver, a person who like believes really deeply in the mission and the work that you're trying to do. That's definitely one. Susan says, our ideal donor would want to engage and help promote the mission. For sure. And that is, okay, Catherine, International Human Rights Organization. For sure. That is definitely, now that gives proper context to the point that you were making before, that folks who can see the humanity in folks who may, you know, not live in their same country or in their same neighborhood, but still be willing to support that work or that answer.
Go ahead, Abiha. I see you want to chime in here.
Yeah, hi. So my ideal donor for URGE would be someone, so URGE started off as Choice USA 31 years ago. And with the intention of like building the next generation of reproductive justice leaders. And even through our rebrand, my ideal donor is someone who either was, you know, is familiar with Choice USA and URGE, maybe participated, was a chapter member back in their college days, someone who understands that we are doing transformation work, we are shifting culture, and we are a political home for young people, and knows that that takes resources and doesn't have easy, clear-cut wins. An ideal donor would understand that a story about Hannah, who is so amazing, is not the answer, you know, because that's something I really struggle with. Our young people are powerful, and I want to show that power, not that, oh, look, Hannah's so sad, Hannah needs resources. No, Hannah is badass and is doing amazing things on campus, and you can either be with it and be part of the change or, you know, not. So there's that. And I just wanted to give an example of a donor we got a couple, this is like a huge win for us, but I'm sharing here, is we got a phone call from someone who lived in one of the states we do deep investment in, who was cleaning out their garage and found a picture from a rally they attended in 2016. And they were standing with a bunch of URGE organizers. And they remembered URGE, and they're like, oh my God, I remember talking to these young people and they were so cool and this work was so good. And this donor already donates to abortion funds. So, you know, they're supporting direct direct service work, but they also recognize that, you know, it's just putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. And so to actually make a difference, you have to invest in base building and power building. And so they called us and they're like, well, how can I support you? And this is something that I'm really proud of my colleague for asking, is what would impact look like for you, and then just threw out, a 3-year commitment of 45,000. This is someone we had no knowledge of. They were in our database, but all we had was their name, and that's it. And they agreed to it, and they sent us a check for $15,000 like the following week. And I don't think we can replicate this win here, but to me, it was like, yeah, we have people. Our ideal donor is someone who understands that transformation takes time, who understands that, you can do the work, but we have to leave something for the generation behind. And then I'll wrap up by saying that the fall of Roe last year proves one thing, and one thing alone, that this is a long fight. Like back in the 60s and 70s, there was this huge movement towards abortion access. But what happened? The Hyde Amendment happened, and it gutted Roe. So Roe was never the ceiling, and Roe was not. Basically, access was restricted, and it disproportionately impacted Black, Indigenous, people of color who come from low-income backgrounds, completely queer, non-binary, trans people. They all were impacted. So I think for me, the ideal donor is someone who understands that there's a very strong opposition to abortion access. And so if they, like, not to be grim, but like, I'm going to die one day, right? We are. But what world are we leaving for the people behind us? And the ideal donor knows that in order to leave a world where people can access the reproductive care that they need, whatever that looks like, to raise kids in safe, sustainable communities, to parent or not to parent, that looks like supporting this work to change the culture and shift that. So I'm going to get off my pulpit now and say that my ideal donor, I hope wherever you are, please come find me. That's it.
So Abiha, there's something that was really great. I mean, aside from the big win on the donation, of course, about that story is that it really, it gives you a nice opportunity for storytelling. Like this is it's a great, like, hey, I was in touch with Urge in this way several years ago. I've been actively giving to all these other groups, and it took this picture to remind me that of this stuff, of this need, this very specific funding, this very specific part of the movement. I thought I was doing the right thing by funding this part of the movement. Roe fell, and now I realized I needed to also fund this other part. So you have a great opportunity to do a first-person testimonial, and it doesn't have to be to just folks who can write $15,000 checks, but it can be other folks who, they're comfortable giving to their abortion funds or stuff like that, but they're not thinking about the activist component and the needs there. And like sharing that stuff creates person-to-person relationships, even though they're not real, like they're not going to become besties with that person, but it makes them feel like they've got a personal connection with someone that is also a fan of your work, and now they're not alone in being a fan of your work, and they can join by giving in that way too. So I love that. I love the ripple effect opportunity that you have on that.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely wanted to highlight like that. That's kind of what we were talking about before, about like the link between fundraising and programming, right? And just that experience that wasn't linked to money at first, but the actual work that you were doing triggered something in that person and gave and made them give that gift, and really wanted to uplift. You as a fundraiser, I think that it's incredibly important what you said about not resisting the urge to have like the pessimist mindset or the savior mindset around the demographic that you're working with. So working with young people and uplifting their strength rather than framing it in a sense of hopelessness. And so I always think that's important. We have one more point here from Nancy, and we can keep moving, but I know that they've been waiting. Nancy says that she's struggling, working on climate justice, and believes that climate change is rooted in centuries of exploitation. And justice involves returning wealth to communities and people it was stolen from. So I think a correct action is for the wealthy to donate, yet I also don't want to incorrectly assume that much lower income people can't invest in some way with what we're doing. Nancy, that's 100% correct. Before I joined Poly here at PM, I was coming from the climate change space and worked there for a number of years, doing development work. And yeah, there's always that tension there again of like, you know, where money is coming from, who should be investing, and like, you know, donations, whether it institutional or from high wealth individuals as a form of reparations, and you know, righting wrong to the past, right? Totally there with you. I think that both can exist. You know, it's just having that knowledge and framework of like how, and again, now it's your job to figure out how do you do that work for both those subsets of people, right? So for the low income donor who, you know, your work directly affects them, for low-lying communities, for frontline communities who are like facing the brunt of climate change, right? How do you talk to them? How do you market your work to them? How do you get them involved? But also for the folks who are seeing the wildfires, the hurricanes, the floods, and have, you know, the wealth to give and want to invest in that change, right? How do you speak to them? How do you help educate them on their role in this movement and who they should be to be like an ally that comes from wealth, right? And so there's a lot of funder education that can happen on our side, you know, to help, you know, develop our ideal donor, right? Not saying that these people exist pre-made, right? There are folks who can fit some of these characteristics, and we should work with them and do some education on both sides to get there. Right.
Yeah, and one more point I'd like to make about some of the comments that happened. You know, one of the things that I find you know, interesting and like as a like a yellow flag of something that we should be thinking about is the you know, when we have members, you know, like let's say non-donor activists that are connected to our work, if they're taking lots and lots of actions, we tend to be like, I want to get to that, no to that person. You know, organizers will reach out, or somebody will reach out, try to get them more and more and more involved. We don't have that same reaction to the person who shows up and gives and gives and gives, but doesn't necessarily do the other things. There isn't a reach out to try to find out what's the sweet spot, what do they want to do, how do they want to connect. You know, that just like, you know, we're saying, like, don't take away the agency of the individual, the activist, the other person on your list to make a decision about giving. Don't do the same thing with our donors too. But also, just like we do with our activists and folks, if their limitations are, I can do this and this only, but I'd love y'all and I love the work that y'all doing, honor and respect that. So, you know, building the relationship with the donor so that you know that you can depend on that gift is great. It closes that, like, that question mark that is like looming, like, is this gift reliable? Because I don't know how connected they are. Well, it answers that question, and you know how to keep in touch with them. And it, you know, like, and then, you know, like, all right, this person doesn't have the capacity to do these other things, or maybe that's just not their jam, but what they can do it help in this way. Awesome. Now I know. And it goes right back to like knowing the information about your donors. You can add information in their records, segment them in a different way, tag them in a different way in your database. And it all helps you do your communication to all of these different folks in a way that feels individualized and personal, but it's actually a little bit easier because you can create automation around it. Ready for me to go to the next slide, Kafila?
For sure. Really appreciate all the feedback and you know, comments. It's been awesome. But we have a half hour left, so I want to make sure we get to all our stuff, and then maybe we can save a little bit of time for some more Q&A. But yeah, let's talk about building a small dollar movement. After you've identified your ideal supporter, think deeply, who are they? And how do those people currently support your work? Do they believe in your work? And if not, why don't they? And if you haven't recruited your ideal donor before, think deeply about why organizationally that hasn't been a priority. And if that's something that you want to and need to shift to be able to see some growth and scale. Okay, let's talk about data, garbage in, garbage out. Why quality data matters. Um, so this is going to be really key in figuring out how effective we can be at learning more about our donors. So quality is way more important than quantity. If you have a smaller subset of really good, really accurate data, you'll be able to make way more informed decisions than a large set of useless or mismanaged data. So really, if data entry is a barrier for your organization, think really deeply about what are the key baseline things that we really need, and make sure you're really good at getting that information. And we'll talk more about like what some of those things may be. Systems and access. So capturing the data is only half the story, right? Data sitting in a CRM somewhere that nobody ever touches is useless. How do you store and disseminate that information, right? Who has access to that knowledge? How do you use that to inform decision making, both as a fundraising team and as an organization, right? The data is supposed to feed back in. This is information for you to use, not for you to store only. And so after that, you really want to develop a baseline. So once you figured out what you want to track, analyze your donor base currently. Can you actually figure out who your ideal donors are, the ones that we talked about in the last segment, based on the information that you currently collect? Or are you missing gaps in your information solicitation process to be able to determine that? And how can you adjust your information gathering to be able to figure out who you're currently soliciting and how far they are away from your ideal supporters? And then after that, you want to target them. Building a base of your ideal donors through your current donors. Things you can do, engagement events, connections to current donors. You know, those degrees of separation are critical in increasing the scale and scope of your work. Use the people who already support you to help find more people who are even closer aligned to you. And then deepen that connection. Consider creating a membership program as a more robust way of connecting with your ideal donor, especially if there are folks who do not have maybe the means to give at a high level, right? This is a great way to get them involved and engaged in programming and mobilization around calls to action. Okay. So let's talk about what some different data points are that may help you find your ideal donor. Age came up before, location came up, how they found out about your organization, preferred communication channel. This is a huge one. And this often goes through generational lines, like my generation and younger, text us and I'm showing up. Email, I might read every couple days. You call me and I don't know your number, you're going to voicemail, right? And that's not the same for older generations, right? So knowing how you want to communicate with which group as well. What was their original motivation for giving? Is it the work? Was it they saw you out somewhere? Is it, you know, an ad they got on Facebook or something like that? Like figure out how they came to you. Because if they are your ideal donor and you figured out how they came to you, maybe that's a replicable process to find more of them. Other causes that they support. Are they a multifaceted donor? Are they really focused on your type of work, like maybe education access or climate change, right? Figuring out who they are and how to plug them in. Any other affiliated groups or organizations, right? These are things that we don't ask, but you know, a person who is in your donor base could be a member of an organization. They can throw a fundraiser for you if they really believe in your work and we're given the opportunity and the capacity to do so, right? Those are ways of scaling, you know, beyond just like a solicitation letter and I ask you for $50 every year. Social media platforms. being able to talk with folks who are engaged around your focus area and breaking into those spaces as an expert really builds your organizational credibility, and folks can gravitate and talk to you in real time. You know, it's one of the closest forms of communication without barriers between an institution like yourself and a prospective donor. And you know, we don't utilize that enough. So let's talk about some ways that we can actually capture this data. Adjusting some of your giving forms or portal questions to include some more robust information in your data tracking when people originally donate. If you're trying to build in a baseline, maybe you don't have any of this information besides maybe an address and a name and a donation amount, right? Do a yearly survey of your donors. Gather some of this information and also throw in some programming stuff. What's one highlight that you love this year about the work that we do? What's one thing you really want us to do in the future? Do we communicate with you too much? Not enough? What are you more interested in? Programming, organizational updates, that type of thing, right? You can then tailor how you communicate and segment your information better. Stewardship, so personal interviews, phone calls, meetings, that type of thing. Social media interactions, like we said before, donor feedback forms, email communication, also focus groups. You can get a small subset of your donors that may come across a different subset of different demographics and figure out based on that group of folks what their interests are and can make some decisions around that. Susan's point, how do you suggest we get people's email? We've been around for a long time before the internet and have an older demographic of members. You can include emails on your solicitation materials, right? So they plug in their names, their address, email, phone number, just add it to the form. Would be a really easy way for folks who are mailing checks or calling in, or even like if they call in, hey, we want to give you your card number or whatever, ask them for an email. You know, say we're moving to a digital process and email is a great way for us to communicate. What month do you advise for a donor member survey? End of year is always great. You know, you can do it with a wrap up when you like give out your if you're doing an annual report or if you're doing you know, some form of like, these are our programming highlights for the year. What do you want to hear? Like, what do you want from us for next year? I think that's like a really tight wrap in. So it's easy to like incorporate into a programming stewardship touch. Yeah, I think it's good. It's more robust. It helps you stand out. You can also do like a summer thing. If your organization also has like a specific type of year that is really big in your community, like for instance, like right now is Pride, right? So if you're a queer-led organization, like you could do something during Pride that would, you know, be framed around this, like, hey, we want to hear from the community. What should we be doing more during this month or throughout the year, right? There are like some kind of natural tie-ins that work with your organizational calendar.
I'm also a big fan of like the one question survey, and without even calling it a survey, like maybe my email might be titled, I have one question I want to ask you, and it's this ... And then when they open the email, basically it's like, you know, an embedded one question survey, like, what do you like about blah, 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 or what would you like to see more of? Or, you know, do you want to see action on climate change? And it could be yes, and that takes them to a petition or something like that. But you know, something more info pulled than that. You know, when you're trying to get people who are offline online, I completely agree with Kafili about like just start putting that stuff on the reply device to get folks to give, and do a QR code in addition. So when I include QR codes on mailings, I always suggest to put the URL under it, because so many folks have been warned, don't just randomly use QR codes. So if you let folks know what that QR code has taken them to, it helps them feel more comfortable, especially if they're getting those AARP mailings about beware of fraud. But start putting stuff in your mailings that allow them to jump and create a more 3D relationship. And the other way is an incentive, like give us your email, sign or use this QR code, and you'll be entered in for a drawing to get one of our cool, recycled tote bags to take grocery shopping, or whatever the premium might be.
Mhm. Okay. So let's build out a roadmap for this. Like we talked about why we would want to do it, what we want to do. How do we actually do this? So the first thing you want to do is define your segmentation criteria, right? Think about the ideal donor. How do we find out who they are? What are their characteristics? And then we have to figure out how to segment our donor base to find that out. Demographic information, giving history, interest, engagement level, anything from those from the table from the last few slides from before would go into there. Then we want to collect the relevant data, right? So we want to gather the accurate data from our sources. And that was the other table, right? So whether we're using surveys, focus groups, interviews, those type of things. And then we want to analyze the data. So look at trends. How many of each group do we have for the answer? And figuring out, what that actual baseline is for your organization in current day. How does it relate to where you want to be and who you really want to engage with? So then identify key segments, right? So, this is going a little bit deeper. So for instance, you might say our major giving program kind of fits this demographic mold, but our recurring small donor giving program fits a different type of mold, right? Is that cool with what you want to do? Is that getting you where you want to go? Are there shifts that you really want to see there, or different ways of having engagement? So you can pull out a little bit deeper information about your base and building those trends, and then develop profiles for this general type of donor, right? So once you've grouped folks together, then you can figure out, okay, cool. These are our mobilizer people. They want to be texted and they want to be given a call to action. They're going to show up to a volunteer. They're going to do a march with us. They'll go canvas with us. Those are those type of folks, right? Then over here, we have our do not touch. They give the yearly check on December 31st. Don't email them, don't call them, don't talk to them. That's not what they want. You know what I mean? And you can tailor your response and your communication for each one. So you can build deeper relationships with the folks that you want to build deeper relationships with and who are showing you those. Question from Susan: would you ever combine segmented donors? For instance, lifetime, major, legacy. Those are all really passionate. I don't think people would necessarily be offended. And this is just internally looking, right? So this isn't something like, unless you were running maybe a membership program where, I'm sure you've seen an annual report where they have people at different giving levels and stuff like that. But for smaller organizations, you really wouldn't do something of those lines. This is just internal data for you to make informed decisions, right? And how to interact with groups. And you may want to run an experiment. There may be some significant overlap with a lot of these groups, but maybe one thing is the communication style is different, or the frequency of touches might be different, or things you invite them to might be different, whether it's different types of engagements. So yeah, it's this is information for you to make more informed decisions on the choices you make organizationally for your donor base.
Yeah, and on that, I think that sometimes what I've seen quite a bit of in my career is sometimes we we create all these definitions around these groups, but we don't necessarily communicate that to the donors, or we never really intended to communicate them to the donors, but we and we like infuse meaning into the relationship. Like one example is like organizations that might have a membership level that is based on a dollar amount of giving. Like if you give X amount of dollars to this membership appeal, then you get these benefits. Well, if somebody responds to a different appeal, but they give that dollar amount, in their head, they're a member, likely, so because donor doesn't understand necessarily like this email is different than this email, or this mailing is different than this mailing. What they know is it takes $100 to become a member. And now they're like upset because they don't have access to any of the things that they're supposed to get access to. So just, like when you think about like creating segmentation, make sure you're not creating situations where you might leave folks out of conversations or things that they think that they're part of, or exclude people, out of areas that, just because somebody's giving you a legacy gift doesn't mean you should stop soliciting them. I see that a lot, and that's a big mistake.
All right, so now that we have our segmented list, let's talk to some folks. Tailor your communication based on, the demographic information that you have. As we said before, if you're talking to young people, college-age students, that conversation, that style is going to look different to like maybe your working professional or middle-aged or elderly donors, or across different other demographics, whether it's race, gender, sex, whatever. Tailor your communication to support your relationship with those donors and personalize it. Put in the effort, do a mail merge, put people's name in there, make them feel special, and use segmented marketing channels, right? So as we said before, some folks, maybe you do an email blast to everybody, but for some people, they get a direct mailer at the end of the year. Some people engage on social media or promote that. Some people may get a text, you know what I mean? Your donor base will help inform what these decisions should be for you and who you're talking to. But once you are speaking with these folks, you now know what they want, right? We've been asking them, what about our org do you like? Why did you originally come here? Why are you continuing to support us? So send them the relevant content, right? These are the stewardship touches that go into your yearly calendar that we're talking about, right? If folks are interested in programming, send them those, even if it's a small email after a big win with pictures, you know what I mean? Those are the type of folks that you send those to. Other folks might be more interested in like the organizational effectiveness or like just yearly highlights, right? So they're on the year-end email. Customize those, customize your donation appeals around what you know about your donors, and highlight really great donors. You know what I mean? You may be surprised how many folks don't know like what's actually available for them, right? If you have an event, some sort of networking event, and you invite some donors that you know are like super interested in that, send some pictures out, blast it to the entire group. You may get a, hey, I didn't even know this was going on. When's the next one? Or I would love to do that, right? They may not have told you the first time, or maybe their capacity to do an event or something has changed. But if you keep them informed, again, you don't remove their agency and you give them a chance to opt in. Great. And yeah, create targeted events. Like we said, all of your donors have networks, right? Like-minded folk tend to be around other like-minded folk. They should be advocates for your organization. If there are other people who are in their circles who they know are interested in this type of work and support, have them introduce you, bring them to certain spaces. Conduct those surveys and those feedback sessions after these events and things, get more information. Is this good? Is this a waste of time? Should we keep doing this, right? Those type of things. And then just continue to monitor and evaluate how this is going, how your donor base is growing and evolving and it turning hopefully into the donor base you want it to be. And then finally, it's all about testing and refinement, right? We're never going to get things right the first, second, third, fourth time. We're going to continue to gather more data from these groups as we communicate with them more, and that's going to continue to reinforce or make us change our behaviors and how we talk to them. So this is a living, breathing process where it's not like, you know, these are the steps and it stays the same year in, year out. You want to grow and evolve with your donor base as well. And then map out what that journey looks like from the point of engagement. Now that you have data, how do we move people along in the cycle, get them more involved in our organization, and build that rapport. And then finally, you can track the segmented progress, right? Now that we know where folks are, you can track things such as retention rate, you can track donation frequency, average gift size, or even like how folks interact with your organization. Like, are they coming to more events? Are you getting a better attendance at your mobilizations? These are all investments that you can do that will actually affect your programming as well. Great. And we have 10 minutes left. Wanted to open up the floor for thoughts, questions, comments, anything that we can dive a little bit deeper on.
Susan, do you want to jump on in and talk about your question?
Sure, I guess I wasn't on mute the whole time anyway, sorry. Hope you didn't hear me typing all this time, or talking to the dog. Yeah, I mean, again, all these tools, you know, as a development officer, you know them, right? And that's why I take these sessions, because it's just to refresh my memory, repeat, you know, remind myself I'm moving in the right direction. But when you're a really small staff of just one, it's just so hard for me to, I mean, I feel like I would love to just have like a major donor officer, which I know bigger development offices have, right? But, you know, I have to do the major donor solicitation and the memberships and the grant writing and the PR and the marketing and, you know, guest services. Like I manage, you know, all of this under a very small organization, and it's just being pulled in so many directions. And yeah, it's just tough. So I guess, you know, yeah, and sure, we do the newsletters, but no, we don't segment them to different audiences. You know, yeah, I'm looking at, as I asked you, kind of segmenting, you know, the higher end groups internally, as Polly was saying. You know, it's going to be an internal, you know, nomenclature, right? Not an external one, and coming up with some maybe extra special events or meetings that we can do for these people. But yeah, it's just a long haul.
100%. Yeah. I think that this can be like as intensive and exhaustive or as like high level as you want or need it to be, right? So like even internally, we do some of this stuff mentally without even thinking about it, right? So if you send an email out, an email blast, and it doesn't do well, right? You have a terrible click rate, no one donates on it. You might go back and think, why did that happen, right? How was I communicating with my donor base? What did I miss that made them like not open this, right? So even if you can't take all these tangible steps, I think just understanding this framework and having it help you tweak how we relate to donors and in a sense of like framing it around their needs and wants rather than necessarily what we feel like we have to get out into the world, I think is a super helpful place to start. And, you know, as your organization hopefully grows and you're able to like build that capacity, you're gonna learn internally, like just based off of what communication you have with your donor base, whether it be like really intensive or like super surface level, like what's been successful for you, right? And even if it's just a call every other week, right, with a donor, hey, how are you liking our programming? How are you liking, you know, our relationship? You know, it's a very common thing for us to like be overwhelmed as fundraisers, you know, juggling 10 different avenues. But I think that there are little ways of like engaging with this process that you can make work for you to help you just make more informed decisions, and hopefully that will increase your capacity as a one-person shop.
You know, the other thing that segmenting can help with is like one, you know, I have totally done this slow and steady over a course of time. Like this year is just going to be like my little drips, finding out information or adding tags to things in my database. Like this month, I'm just going to, you know, hunt and peck in my database and find everybody who fills this thing, and I'm going to tag them this way. And it could all just be to like lead to a future implementation of a, you know, a better system. But like, you know, so if I can identify like all the people who've done X, Y, or Z or given at X, Y, or Z level, and I can like massive tag them all at once, then like slowly over time, I can use that information when I'm putting out, when I'm, you know, trying to get the best results on a certain campaign or, so, you know, like I think the mistake that I've made in the past is to think that I had to do it all now. And you rush into anything, it's never going to be that great. So there's nothing wrong with taking your time. If you know that you can't implement it anyway, that's all right. You know, like just get the info, put it in when you have, you know, the extra brain power or the staff or the whatever, you can figure out how, you know, how to use this information. But but if you take the opportunity here and there to actually do it, to just add in some tags that give you a little bit more information, you'll find, typically you can find ways to use it. And hopefully, you know, you have systems, a database that'll let you do some automation, make it life a little bit easier. But even if you don't, I've done lots of this stuff manually, and it can be really helpful manually too. I think that's why I like the 1-question surveys, because I can drop them out here and there, and it just gives me one data point on that one period of my calendar that I might have the extra 5 minutes.
Yeah, Abia's point was great too. Just wanted to uplift that about doing a virtual donor teach-in, and that anyone who engages with that, you know, you already know they have like a vested interest in being more engaged. So anything like that is a great idea. Wow, time flew by. I can't believe that was an hour and a half. But thanks, y'all. Really appreciated everyone joining and being a part of the conversation. Please give us your feedback at the link below, which I will copy and put in the chat. You can email Polly, myself, or Bethany directly if you have any follow-up questions. And I'd really love to see y'all on the 23rd when we talk about diversifying income beyond just donor contributions. So thanks, everyone. I hope you have
Thank you.
a great weekend, and hopefully see you in a couple weeks.
Bye.